This is Bonjour Chai, the Roncesvalles Minyan edition. I'm Avi Finegold, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltz Bovy and special guest Michael Inslick live in Roncesvalles. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about the Giller Prize. We are talking about Roncesvalles as a village. Is it anti-Semitic? Is it pro-Semitic? Is it philo-Semitic? What is going on with it? And maybe we'll talk about this little thing that happened in America yesterday, the election. All that and more coming right up. Phoebe, I'm in your house.
You are. Avi is, for the very first time, seeing my house.
And
what do you think?
We are physically
it's
together.
magnificent, isn't it?
It's exactly what I imagined every time I see on Zoom the different corners, and it's all stitched together.
That's the problem with the internet age, less mystery, but it's exciting. Yes, a real...
It feels good. And we have a special guest, a live Roncesvalles guest, like a live resident of Roncesvalles. Michael, can you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do.
Yes, my name is Michael Inslick, and I love the way you pronounce my name. You pronounced it like the Jewish way, Inslicht. But I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, social psychologist and cognitive psychologist. I live in Roncesvalles. I've been here for about 3.5 years, and I do love the neighborhood, especially the trees and proximity to an incredible park. But since October 7th, things changed for my family and I wrote about that recently. So I think that's what we'll be talking about. But we can talk about psychology, anything you like.
Are we going to psychoanalyze the future president of the United States?
Well, these aren't armchairs we're sitting in. We're going to IKEA dining chair analyze it.
We can't not at least mention the fact that we are recording on Wednesday morning, the morning after the American election.
Yes,
and
we are.
I have to fly back to the U.S. tomorrow, and I don't really want to. But such is life.
I can't say I was shocked. In 2016, I was shocked. Was I shocked here? It seemed like it could go either way, and it went one of those ways. Although I guess I was a little bit surprised all the same because people kept talking about the Electoral College, but then the popular vote going to Trump.
What I was surprised, and this is actually psychology, was this sense that on both sides, as of 2 days ago, I felt like everybody was saying it's too close to call, it's too close to call, it's too close to call. And yet everybody was secretly assuming, yes, but it's going to go our way. And half the people were wrong. And I don't know if there's a phenomenon around that or not, but you get what I'm saying? Like there was this sense that if you were voting
Wishful
Democrat,
thinking?
that it was, that there was, it's too close to call, it's too close to call. Nobody's actually saying out loud, but I'm not worried about it because I didn't get the sense that a lot of people that were voting Democrat were worried about what was about to happen, even though everybody was saying that they were worried.
I spoke to a lot of people, a lot of Americans who are faculty at University of Toronto, and they were thinking about it, and I think also just secretly hoping it would be a blowout for their side and thinking that it might be and that the polls were somehow wrong. The past few days I've been reading about how modern polling has kind of put the thumb on its scale a little bit for Donald Trump because they got it wrong 2 cycles in a row now. But it looks like the polling was about right in the sense that we didn't know. It was, I don't know. I'm not sure it's as terrible as we all fear it will be, but it certainly won't be good, I don't think either.
I mean, what I've noticed since we have been following the Jewish angle on this is that I see, just because I follow a lot of people with different politics, I've seen both clearly the Democrats lost. They were not pro-Israel enough. I've also seen clearly that the Democrats lost. They were so pro-Israel and they didn't worry about Gaza and they didn't care and all of this. And I have seen both. And I at first I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. That doesn't make sense. These are contradictory. But then I was thinking about actually, no, there are people who didn't vote for Harris for both reasons. And that does exist. I don't think that was make or break for the election.
But it is interesting to see the postmortem. I think for a lot of people, it's just like they're in shock and they're just still processing. But I am seeing some postmortem and they are contradictory, like you said, Phoebe. So I've seen some, and maybe just, the algorithm that Twitter's feeding me, saying it's wokeism is, gone awry and now it's kind of paying its due. Like most of the U.S. is in the center and they're sick and tired of some of the, let's say, more progressive politics from the Democrats that were playing footsie with, at least. So that's one angle, which seems maybe right. That's something I'd gravitate towards, but I'm not sure. And then I've seen the exact opposite, which is that the Democratic Party is not progressive enough. And it wasn't, forceful enough in the social justice values. And that's why the Democrats lost. That seems to me really wrong, but I'm coming in with my own biases.
I mean, the only thing I could think that could kind of square that is that the Democrats tried to have it both ways and that didn't work. And that maybe if they'd seemed a little bit more courage of convictions or whatever, or that they would have gotten more enthusiasm from the people who thought whatever it was and would have lost some votes but gained more. I'm not a political strategist, but I live in Canada.
There
so,
you go. Let's move on to a Canadian topic then.
Oh, okay.
This is a home of books. That's a good thing. I love this. Anytime I walk into a house and there's floor-to-ceiling books.
There are a
this
lot
is my
of
kind
books.
Of You're a reader and a writer. Are you a winner of the Giller Prize? Have you won the Giller Prize in the past?
If I said that I had, that would be a fiction. The Giller Prize only goes, sorry about the terrible joke, but the Giller Prize only goes to fiction. But what's a Giller?
It's the prestigious Canadian Book Award. It is also corporately sponsored, primarily with a title sponsorship by Scotiabank, I do believe. And I believe that there has been some unrest for this recently. Can you tell us what some of this unrest is, Phoebe?
Basically, this Scotiabank is invested in an Israeli arms dealer. Is this correct? Something like this?
If not that directly, then at arm's length or something.
At arm's length to an arms dealer. And a lot of writers, a lot of people, literary world type writers are very much against Israel's war in Gaza. And what's happening with this Giller Prize is that there's been a lot of complaints about the Giller Prize's association with Scotiabank. Then there's also the possibility that because it's Jack Rabinowitz, who is the one who set up this prize, that it's a Jewish entity, is that entering into it, or is it just this association? Because I mean, some of this is just this kind of usual arts situation where anybody who's a patron of the arts presumably earned their money in the way people earn large sums of money, which is not generally giving to charity and writing a poem here and there. You know what I mean? Like there's always some sort of business type thing. One of the articles I was reading about this was saying about like, could they find a not so problematic sponsor? And I'm thinking like, what would that mean? Is it just not ties to this particular war, not ties to anything that anybody could find unsavory? So basically now there's been a lot of rejection of the Gillers, and there has also been this huge sort of pushback PR campaign from the Gillers where like if I put on Twitter now, all my ads are for the Gillers. Because the question is, if protesters alienate this family, maybe they just won't do the prize anymore. Authors will not be getting it's this huge amount of money. It's $100,000, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So to Scotiabank, that's not a lot of money, but to the people getting this prize, it's often world changing.
I think it in fact is world changing. So I think
I
remember a world before the Gillers were around, and there were a small handful of authors, the big ones like Margaret Atwood, Mordechai Rissler. But the Canadian literary scene is much more healthy now, flourishing, lots of writers, and I think the Giller had a big part in that. So it is a big deal. The options that are now the Giller's facing is continue as is or no award. So why would the literary community want that? It's not as if the Gillers will say, okay, we'll start something else and we'll appease you. I think it'll be that or nothing, is my sense.
I mean, another angle that I think we need to throw in here is that, like many arts and educational entities, the Giller Prize has really presented itself not merely as like promoting the arts for its own sake, but as a social justice mission. And then you get, and this happens all the time at universities, right, where once an entity has said that it's on the side of social justice, what do you do when here's an issue where what the social justice approach is, there isn't a uniform understanding?
I mean, if I was the family or Scotiabank, I'd be like, take my money.
If you were Scotiabank,
take the money
Avi.
and just walk away and like say, great, you don't want this, right? So like, I'm going to pick up my toys and I'm going to move on, go do something else. Or say the opposite, say we're still doing this prize. It's up to you to submit or not. And you want to get a chance to a crack at $100,000 and fame, you're welcome to, or you're welcome to not. And then it becomes, if that's what you're willing to put your money where your mouth is and say, I'm not going to be in consideration for a major award. thank you. We're glad to see that you really believe in your convictions and move on and, let it be. I don't see a reason why we should, turn this into a thing.
Yeah, I think the way the Guerrillas are handling it now seems about right. They're like, okay, they're not blackballing anybody. They're not saying if you withdrew your name this year, which I think a number of people have withdrawn their name, that you won't be able to participate next year. They're being very gracious. I think I'd be much more petty and be sure, don't participate now or ever. But they're being, no, you can submit again next year if you'd like, and we'll see what, if anything, has changed.
I'm thinking about, for example, the Polar Music Prize. That's the big Canadian Music Prize. And several years ago, it was won by this group called Godspeed You Black Emperor. And they did not mention the money as like being politically tainted or anything, but they were like, awards like this are dumb. They did not show up to the award. They took the money and they like distributed it to like charity or something like that. And it was a big middle finger to the Polar Music Prize. Like, you're going to give this to us. We're going to do something that you don't want with this, and didn't affect their career or not. Like, again, with awards, you're free to do or not do. And I feel like nobody's forcing anybody. This is an opt-in sort of thing. And like, great, move on. And like, that's it.
I love that take, but you're like, hey, put your money where your mouth is. Win the award and then give it away to a Palestinian group. You could do that.
The angle of this that I'm mainly interested in is just like, it kind of posits Jews as being on the side of like the producers, the money, whatever, and then the artists as being like non-Jews. But there are also a lot of Jewish creatives and Jewish writers and artists and so forth who have their own angles on all of this. So I wrote for a while ago for the Canadian Jewish News quarterly print magazine about Jewish open letters, because that's this kind of ongoing thing where there's always an open letter about one thing or another. And now there are these sort of rival letters. There's the group of authors boycotting Israel, and then now an open letter from something called the Creative Community for Peace, where I think possibly tens of thousands, a huge number of Jewish, and not only Jewish, I should say, because I've seen there some names that are definitely not Jewish, writers, thinkers, creative types are not boycotting Israel and saying that they're against these kind of blanket boycotts. But it's very, I don't know how to put this, like celebrity oriented. Bernard-Henri Lévy is involved, and so is Mayim Bialik.
Right.
So anyway,
is there
we'll
anything
see.
different between these open letters and the ones that have come back in the past, and like just so many of these, as you've said?
So actually, it's good you ask this, Avi, because this will segue us to our main topic, is that it seems like just the sheer number of participants in this one and the number of people I wasn't always going to expect, I was sort of putting themselves out there in this way, seems to be of a piece with what I have observed anecdotally of a lot of people who had been kind of quiet for a year, who are broadly like pro-Israel in one way or another. Like, could mean a lot of different things. It can mean thinking Israel should go on existing alongside a Palestinian state. It can mean thinking the whole world should be Israel, mean anything. But basically that side has become a little bit more vocal, like in the last month or so since the anniversary, perhaps. I don't know. So I
agree.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's what brings us to why you're here. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I just want to get a plus one there, because I also, something happened. So my calendar is not the Gregorian calendar, but it's the academic calendar. Mm-hmm. But something happened in September, like the start of the academic year, where I feel there are fewer weak Jews out there. I think this is prototype. Israel is the exception. Israeli Jews are the exception. This prototype of the weak Jew, which is like the Jews in the diaspora, who are, we fight with our minds. We fight with, pen and paper, but we don't necessarily stand up for ourselves as much. And I've seen some shift. I mean, myself, I've started speaking out a little bit. I feel weird about it. But I've seen others do it too, who were previously sitting, just staying silent. I don't know what happened exactly.
I did a jaunt around the neighborhood, right? Today we're here, and I didn't get a sense of where things were, because as you mentioned to me, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but like at the beginning, like last October, November, December even, and beyond, Roncesvalles was wall-to-wall pro-Palestinian
okay,
signage.
I can give you a little bit of a signage tour, and you will give your signage interpretations. Basically, right after October 7th, on the street where we are now, there were like flyers up with the paraglider image of, like the Hamas attackers, sort of glorifying this.
Okay.
That is different from other signage of ceasefire, right? These are different things. But it was uniformly, so first it was the paraglider type stuff. Then soon after it was that there were flyers up about a ceasefire and free Palestine and in various incarnations. But these were not in store windows primarily. These were like on, and you correct me if I'm wrong, on like lampposts and so forth. Sometimes someone would have gone through with a Sharpie and like said something like Free Palestine from Hamas or whatever, you know what I mean? That type of thing. But in this particular neighborhood, you were not seeing like bring back the hostages photos. That was not up. And I was back in New York briefly in the fall of 2023 after October 7th and saw those everywhere. And like here, certainly not in this neighborhood, you would not see this at all. I saw some sort of imitation, like in that style, about Palestinians killed in the war. I did not see any of the Israeli ones anyway. Then what happened more recently is that these signs went up that said, is it High Park, Parkdale, or Parkdale, High Park, Parkdale, I think.
Parkdale, High Park.
Or Parkdale, High Park, whatever, for a free Palestine.
Yes, I did notice that one in your neighborhood.
Yes,
close
so
by
that
there,
started going up, and then I was away for a couple of weeks in August, came back, and it was on up and down the street. Like it was the whole street, basically. Every store pretty much had it. Then many of these signs went away, and I had wondered what had happened there. And here, sitting with us in our studio, we have a bit of the answer. So that's I wanted to ask about this.
Yeah, maybe
what happened to those signs, Michael?
Yeah, maybe a small part. I don't know how big of a part I played, but I just want to kind of add a little bit of context to what you said. I live in the neighborhood as well, not in this street. I live in a different street. And October 8th or 9th, I started seeing things. There was this, at first I thought it was maybe some sort of charity space, but I then looked them up online and they're actually a design space. Within days of October 7th, they had a massive, massive mural in their window that spelt out almost like a quilt, Free Palestine. And every letter was an image, and most of them were fine, but some of them were a bit, Palestine was all of Israel. And Free Palestine to me is, I don't know how to interpret that. I think if by free we mean Palestinians should be free, should have the right to self-determination, should have their own state. Yes, I'm for it. I'm definitely for a two-state solution. I believe that there should be Palestinians have a right to self-determination, just like Jews have a right to self-determination. But that expression, Free Palestine, reminds me too much of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is something that Hamas says. Or if they dare, sometimes students on campuses will chant it in Arabic, which is not that Palestine will be free, Palestine will be Arab. To me, that is a genocidal statement. That's like Jews be gone. So I find that offensive.
So what did you do? Well, let's first talk about you had a letter.
Yeah, so first, I saw these signs. I did nothing about it. And then I was just like, every time I would see these signs, my heart would beat a bit faster. I'd get angry. So my wife, who's much less belligerent than I am, she said, well, how about if you wrote a letter, an anonymous letter, and maybe sent it to people? So, this is months later when now we're seeing on everyone's lawn these signs. Like in my street, my block, there were 3 or 4 houses that had, or more, that had these signs. And then up and at our main strip, I would see the burrito place has got, a sign, and the nail place has got a sign. So, and I don't know if everyone knows how these signs make people feel. Not all Jews feel this way. Some Jews, I've got friends in the neighborhood.
We will get to that too. We will get to that too.
So I wrote this letter and I explained to them that I'm your Jewish neighbor.
And you start handing out this letter one by one to stores.
I don't have that much courage, so I didn't actually, with a few exceptions, I did not face anybody. I either just went at night when the store was closed, put it in their mail slot, or slipped it under the door, or I would then go to my neighbors and put it in their mail slots during the day. I didn't knock on doors and have a conversation with anybody. I was too scared. And I did notice, not so much with the homes, but on the street, that, yes, signs were taken down. Was it my doing? I have no idea. I suspect I'm not the only Jewish person who's responding this way. Phoebe, you mentioned people kind of graffitiing a little bit, the signs.
So I've seen, like, the Jewish response to the signs. I'm learning about it mainly through your article and through your article being shared on social media and through getting emails. There's a split. There are some people who are like, it's exactly like this. It's exactly like this in my whichever other neighborhood. It's exactly like this in Roncesvalles. It's exactly like this, whatever. And others are happy, or from people who are Jewish saying that they're happy to see the Free Palestine signs. So either they're happy to see the signs because they see this as sticking up for the marginalized, or who just don't really get what the issue is, because in one of the responses I saw, because it's not like it's swastikas everywhere. And this really does sort of get to what my own reaction has been to the signs. And I wrote about it on my blog, which is something else, but whatever, I think linked to in some of this, which is that basically I don't know what I think. And that's what drives me crazy, is that there is a version of this that I am for. There is a version of this that would really upset me and be not at all what I want. And a lot has to do with context. And that's what I keep coming back to. And if there hadn't been the paraglider flyers on October 8th or whatever, I would probably have had a different response to a ceasefire flyer the next day in the same spot. You know what I mean? Like, and you're always trying to make sense. Like, we're not all individually like polling everybody we pass on the street, right? You can't know why anybody says what they're saying. And you have to just kind of go by context. And, at a certain point, I myself was thinking, okay, this is clearly going on too long, and this is too many people being killed, and this is, the meaning of ceasefire meant something different to me on like October 8th, or October, maybe it wasn't October 8th that went up, but maybe like October 11th or whatever it was, It's hard because you can't, as a practical matter, interview everybody who has put up a sign, and you can't assume that that every time somebody puts up a sign, it has the same meaning, right? Nor that it has the meaning of whoever's. Do you know who? Okay, so here's a question: who's putting out these? Like, where are the signs coming from?
I tried to do a little research on that at one point to be what group is this, and it seems like there is some group that is creating the signs here in this riding, which is Parkdale High Park, but. I would have assumed they were somewhat well funded, but they were. I did see at one point they had a GoFundMe to produce these signs. So this must maybe grassroots. I'm not exactly sure.
So another question is just: is this unique to this neighborhood, and if so, why? So just a little background on the neighborhood, because it's a historically Polish neighborhood, not Polish Jewish. It's not a neighborhood with like deep Jewish roots, to put it mildly. It doesn't have a synagogue, temple, JCC, anything of that nature, Hebrew schools, anything like that, nothing like that around. But there are a lot of Jews, of whom I would assume some of the people putting up these signs are Jewish, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is, first of all, is this particularly prevalent, this sort of signage in this neighborhood? And if so, how do you explain it?
I think there's no doubt that it's particularly prevalent here. And I should probably maybe qualify that a little bit. So we've been talking about Roncesvalles,
right? And it's not a particularly like Arab or Muslim neighborhood.
No,
either.
it's not at all. In fact,
yes, and that's
I've looked
something
up the
you mentioned
census.
in your article about how white specifically.
Yeah, this is a white, progressive, wealthy neighborhood. There are more Jews than Muslims in this neighborhood. I looked that up. Parkdale especially, it has a lot of artists, a lot of creatives, and this maybe ties in with our conversation with the Giller. Maybe have an especially social justice bent.
The hyper locality of what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. Different neighborhoods have different politics, and they are going to represent those differently in their store signs. And I was asking myself, like, in the flip side, in the reverse, if I was in what's a heavily Jewish neighborhood here, I don't know, Forest Hills or Bathurst and Lawrence, and somebody was pro-Palestinian, not pro-Hamas, but saying, that we need to get things going or whatever. You're in this neighborhood and you see a lot of signs that say, bring them home, with all the kidnapped signs and all of these things coming up. And you started writing a letter and putting stuff to your neighbors and saying, listen, I believe that they're wrongfully there, but maybe you should put up a sign that says Free Palestine also, or like where 40,000 people shouldn't die. Like, what would the response be? Maybe it might be there, it might not, but like what we're seeing in that neighborhood is the heavily Jewish neighborhood, and all of the signs and the resultant politics is making itself seen. And what you're seeing in Roncesvalles is just, as we said, these are artists, these are creatives, they feel like they have this affinity. I guess my point is that if you're living in this neighborhood, you're kind of moving here knowing that this is the kind of neighborhood that is. And I'm not faulting you. I think it's wonderful, but it's not a heavily Jewish neighborhood. You're going to see politics that aren't necessarily yours. And that's kind of what's there. And at the very least, what you can expect is maybe, like I said before, asking them to say, don't be pro-Hamas while you're pro-Palestine, or recognize that when you say from the river to the sea, it's kind of genocidal. So I'm not telling you to not be pro-Palestinian, but think of the other side. That's about as best as you might be able to expect in this neighborhood, given that there's not a lot of Jews. And this is the politics of the people.
Can I talk about the question of how many Jews there are? Because this is something that when I first moved to Toronto, I thought, they're like, where are the Jews? Because I was just so used to New York, where like there's just Jews everywhere and Jewish culture everywhere. I moved to Roncesvalles thinking like I was the only, I even like blogged about it for the CJN. I wrote some column about like being the only Jew in Roncesvalles, kind of joking, you know, I figured I wasn't. And now I know that there are just like on my block alone, at least 4 Jewish families. And it's not like a huge block. I'm not talking about like the neighborhood. I'm talking about like my street. So I think there are a lot of Jews.
According to my research, it's about 2% of the population of this riding.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit behind the scenes, trying to make sense of these statistics, because it seems likely that there would be a higher percentage in Roncesvalles itself than in the riding.
Can I get back to one thing you asked,
please,
which I didn't give a chance to answer, which I think is a good one, which is you're essentially asking me why I moved to this neighborhood. Given the,
I didn't say why. I accept that there are people that are in this neighborhood, and so that's part of the thing. Going into a neighborhood like this, you kind of have to assume that's it.
Right. So my answer is, my politics are the politics of this neighborhood. So when there are a lot more signs in this neighborhood than my previous neighborhood, so I grant that. I remember noticing that. But I'm down with BLM. I'm down with trans rights. I'm down with supporting homeless people. Like those are my values too. But I draw a line to when my people are threatened with extinction. And I view this current war that way. I have maybe an extremist view of it. That's how I view it. And I do not think there's an equivalence between a poster of hostages and a sign that says Free Palestine. Maybe that's the way I'm reading it, but I would be okay with a sign that says ceasefire now, or peace in the Middle East, or coexistence. Yeah. To me, I view the hostage sign as equivalent to something like that.
But you were saying about how you were reading into some of these signs, like it's not a far leap from this and that, and I don't know your politics, but it hurts me and it makes me feel like whatever it is. And that's a totally fine thing. But to go and read into the basic, simple thing, free the hostages, and somebody's going to go and say, well, if that's the case, then Palestine's never going to get liberated. And can you please maybe at least recognize the Palestinian rights? And like, that's where I'm trying to play with it and accept that like neighborhoods are different. Yeah.
I get that. But like, I think we do have sensitivity in our society. So for example, honestly, there's nothing wrong with the statement, all lives matter. That sentence is nothing wrong with that sentence, except it's in a
Phoebe,
context.
I think we're going to get canceled.
Except we're in a context where that is interpreted in a specific way. That's seen as a response to Black Lives Matter. And now we know we should not be saying that. We understand that those words are offensive, and we don't put signs like that up anymore. So why is my perspective, and the perspective I would think many Jews, maybe not a majority, but possibly a majority, why is our perspective of this is a statement that I find threatening when that's not respected to the same extent?
Okay, can I jump in on this? I think because nobody would know what Jews here think, because really until recently nobody was talking about it, and I think there was a lot of fear. And I remember I've thought throughout this period, what would happen if I put up this? I thought like, oh well, clearly if you put up this sort of thing, this would happen. If you put up this sort of thing, that would happen. And then I saw people nearby in the neighborhood put up an Israeli flag, and to my knowledge nothing has happened. But I think there has been a lot of fear. So I think that what that has meant is that there has been this kind of assumption on the part of somebody putting up a sign like this. A reasonable assumption would be that everybody agrees with you that this is a nice message along the lines of other messages. The assumption is that is the normal view in the area. If you are a good person, you hold this view. I think your assumption would be that this is like the Ukrainian flags going up. This is the new thing. This is the social justice thing. So, everybody who's a good person is on board with this, and in the same way, right? Obviously, yes, I do. I personally think anybody who's a good person would be devastated by what's happening in Gaza. I say this being a Zionist. There you go. You know what I mean? But like what I'm saying is I think that there's this, you wouldn't know that there's a difference of opinion.
So I think that that's,
until recently.
My take on it is that, and this is where I throw the Jewish community under the bus or the established, whatever we're going to talk, the more right-wing policy,
yes.
whatever it is, that there was very little room made post-October 7th and up until now, except for fairly recently when the tide has started to change, there's been very little room for nuance within the Jewish community. And you didn't have people saying, well, I hope you understand from the river to the sea is genocidal, so maybe be pro-Palestine, but don't be genocidal. It's anything that you say is going to be absolutely horrible, so don't say anything about Palestine. Free
I think
Israel.
You're talking about a different world.
Yeah. No, but
you're
I'm saying,
you're talking about a different. You're talking about things that are not relevant to the spheres we're talking about.
What I'm trying to say is that I get what you're saying, but I'm saying that has been the dominant dialogue within the Jewish community, which meant that there has been very little room for nuance to go to people who are pro-Palestine and explain, hey, it's okay to be pro-Palestinian, just don't be genocidal to my people.
I mean, I think we're maybe inhabiting different worlds. So I don't inhabit a Jewish world. I identify more as Jewish now than I ever have. Post October 7th, because I feel scarred and traumatized and maybe even a bit triggered by these things. Like my wife, who's far left of me, has also been traumatized by what's happening. And her response is, why can't we have the word and? And I feel for the victims of October 7th and the Palestinians. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Mm-hmm. Or is not the word here.
For sure.
And I do not know anybody. Again, I'm not in Jewish circles who are saying these really kind of hateful things. Maybe you're in your world, you are.
Well, what I hear is a lot of anti-everything Palestinian, or we're just going to stay quiet about it. We're not even going to talk about it, and that doesn't leave room for nuance amongst people that want to have that nuance. And as soon as you're polarized in one direction, you're polarized in the other direction. The people in the middle who are really the ones that are doing the real work are the ones that have a very difficult time with this.
I think I'm trying to think if I or anybody I know around here has ever felt silenced by the organized Jewish community, and that just seems like preposterous. Like it just seems like it wouldn't enter into it. But I'm thinking I want to go back to your point about like why people live where they do, right? And I think to be affected by this moment as a Jew requires a different level of strength of Jewish commitment than the decision to like want your children to go to a Jewish day school or something like this. These are different levels of attachment, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you might wish that Jews were more sort of broadly, like more like went to synagogue more often or whatever, like something like that. But the demographic reality is that there are a lot of people who don't have certain ties but have other ties, and there's a pool of people who basically like these signs didn't used to. I don't know how to put it, but like,
can I ask you a tough question?
Sure.
If you were scouting out this neighborhood,
this is an easy question. I wouldn't live here.
You would not. Okay, it's not.
No, I wouldn't live here.
Would you have not moved in here?
If I walked through it, let me be more. Can I just be more specific? If I had walked through it that day in August when I walked through and it was every store. Like
this past August.
Yes, this past August. Yes, where every store had this in the window. And as I said, I think there should be a Palestinian state, and I'm plenty upset about what I've seen. Mm-hmm. In the news and on social media, obviously, in Gaza, obviously. What I'm saying is, if I had seen those signs, I would have thought, okay, this is not the neighborhood for me. Now, with it being in like, a left-wing bookstore and a coffee shop, I would still live here, I guess, is probably the way I'd put it. But that day in August, I certainly wouldn't.
I think I'm with you. I mean, so in this piece I wrote in the Canadian Jewish News, the last line was like, my wife and I entertained the thought. I mean, that's true. That's honest. We've talked about it. But seriously, not really, because we love our house. I adore trees. I still like this neighborhood. I just wish there was a bit more a plurality of views. I'm also annoyed by the signs now. Like, and it's not even about the Palestine signs. Like, I wrote this on my blog, my Substack, which will come out maybe in a month or two. I don't think it's neighborly. I don't think it's a good idea to be putting our politics on our lawns. I don't care what your politics are, whether I agree with them or disagree with them. My neighbor's a person who shovels my snow, my front walk sometimes, who help, literally, I share with my neighbors like butter and sugar and food sometimes. And if they're putting up signs that I find obnoxious or that diminish me as a person, then I'm not going to want to do those things. And I don't think that's the way we build neighborhoods and build cohesion. It just ends up polarizing.
Well, there's also the Canadian idea of like putting whatever is happening elsewhere behind you and just kind of getting on with it.
I just spoke to somebody about for a piece that I'm writing that's unrelated to this. They were like, look, I live in a small town and I'm a rabbi and I'm Jewish and we have a community. And honestly, if you want something, you kind of have to do it yourself. If you're the kind of person who doesn't want to make the kiddush in your shul on Shabbat, or doesn't want to be the one teaching the kids in the afternoon school, and you just expected it to be there for you, then you shouldn't belong in a small town. And the idea being that like whatever you want of a neighborhood, Jewish or not, you have to be willing to step up and do it yourself. And it sounds like what you're doing is that, to say, I'm not taking it anymore. I'm going to be neighborly about it, but also not take it sitting down. And that's the right way to approach it. Not just saying, I won't move from Roncesvalles. I like it here. There's a lot of reasons why I'm here, but I'm going to make my Jewish voice heard. And I want the people, for the vast majority of them, I'm guessing, who don't quite understand what it means to be pro-Palestinian and to pick up everything from the pro-Palestine movement, and to sort of say, well, if I'm the only one that can educate these people, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. And I also know, again, because there's been quite a lot of reaction from the article I wrote in the Canadian Jewish News, people emailing me, saying my words were their words. Another person who was more kind of in line with what I was saying got it exactly right. I'm a Jew on edge. Like I feel something is awoken in me. I'm extra sensitive now. And I remember my parents complaining about antisemitism and I'd laugh at them. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, it's maybe genetic. It just woken in me this thing. And I just can't help but see it now. But not everyone is woke in that way.
So apart from signs, is it mainly like, have you had many in-person awkward interactions? Is it more just that like you now know what people, because I mean, I feel like because of just sort of Toronto, Canadian, Anglo ways of being, a lot is kind of subtle, but like, do you think people like know you're Jewish when you're walking around? Because I feel like that's also like another aspect of this, is because Jews in Roncesvalles would not be like visually identifiable as such. Although I have noticed more Star of David necklaces around. But,
my wife now wears, she doesn't like the Star of David, but she wears a chai. So she wears
So we should say bonjour to her.
Yes, that's right. Yes. That's right. I think when I walk on the streets, people probably think I'm from somewhere in the Mediterranean. They don't, I'm a Mizrahi Jew, and people don't probably have any idea. And sometimes after going on social media where I see too much anti-Semitism, I'm like, calm down, Mickey, just chill out. No one knows. Just go and walk.
I have to ask you, because this happens to me all the time. Do people come up to you and when they find out you're Mizrahi and say, which side of the family is that? Like, which parent is Sephardic, right? And you have to sort of tell them, not the Innslicht side,
yeah,
obviously.
Right, exactly.
People come up to you like, which parent of yours, you're half Moroccan? From which side? I'm like, not the Finegold.
Yes, exactly.
But this has been wonderful. I do like that you're creating the nachas day to day. That's my segue.
This is an audition to be a cantor.
But I don't want to be a cantor.
I wasn't raised with any religion. You're Jewish, though.
The heartbeat of
I welcomed Sam into my community by first taking his foreskin and next showing him the beautiful Twister bagel.
Culturally Jewish is the only podcast covering the weird, wide world of independent Canadian Jewish art.
Listen to Culturally Jewish at the cjn.ca/culture or wherever you get your podcasts.
Michael, you have a nachas for us? You have a bregus for us, maybe? What do you? What's been floating your boat this week?
There are two things. So I'm actually on sabbatical right now. I get this. I love my job, and I'm on sabbatical, which means I'm not teaching, and I don't have any service, but I'm still researching. But I have time to fill. So things that I've really enjoyed, is I've started a new Substack, which is kind of like a blog. But I don't want to talk about mine. I want to talk about my good friend Paul Bloom, who's also a Ronci Jew right here. He's a well-known psychologist. And he just writes about morality in a way that just kind of gets you thinking. So check out his Substack. It's called Small Potatoes. The other thing that I really like, also with Paul Bloom, is in the neighborhood, we play pickleball now. Quite a few days a week. He's insatiable. He can't get enough of it. So that's been something that's giving me lots of pleasure.
Phoebe, you got nachas?
Well, my nachas is going to be
Borges?
I'm going to do a nachas and a borges. The nachas is the hope that all of this sort of coming together of Jews in Roncesvalles, both sort of solidarity coming together to argue and say that the other Jews are all way off about everything, because that's part of it. That's part of the spirited discussion. That this leads to a nice Roncesvalles Jewish community where, it's not all about anti-Semitism and so forth. And eventually that now I know who the other Jews are, and in a good way. You know what I mean? That maybe something will come of it that's not all, maybe there will be better times. That it could be the start of something, right? So that's the sort of warm and fuzzy. The less warm and fuzzy is why my fellow Americans, why? Effectively, I'm not thrilled with the results of the election. I don't think it means the end of the world. Probably, if I'm proven wrong, so be it. But yeah, that's not a great choice. But what are you going to do? It's the will of the people, that not of this person. So my borges is the election results. I don't contest them. I'm not storming the Capitol, but I'm moving to Canada. That's it. It's going to happen now. Avi, what have you got?
I have a borges. I don't usually, but I do today, and it's actually pulling together a lot of threads from different things that we've been talking about. One of the things that I noticed in the days leading up to the election yesterday in the U.S. was competing letters with Orthodox rabbis for Trump and Orthodox rabbis for Harris. They've gotten attention. They've had stories written about them. And I have to say that it really, really disappoints me that you have these open letters, but that rabbis are getting involved and polarizing themselves. And a lot of them tend to not be pulpit rabbis. Pulpit rabbis are smart enough generally to stay out of partisan politics. But just rabbis in general stating their claim and saying, I think that you don't understand. Trump is a absolute danger to the republic, and we have to vote against him. And the other ones that are saying, no, Trump is absolutely the only thing that is going to protect Israel. Whatever it might be, turning this into morality and saying that my ethics and my morals compel me to sign a letter saying that you should vote one way or another is a very dangerous road. And it's generally not something the rabbis have done. And now that they're doing it, it's just getting more and more polarizing. I am not for that. So that is my borges.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending November 9th, Shabbat Parshat Lech Lecha. The show is produced by Michael Fraiman, live podcast production and editing by Zachary Kauffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Fraiman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is always one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.